They were 3 days on their journey, and reached town by 3 o'clock the third day, glad to be released after such a journey from the confinement of a carriage. The house was handsome and handsomely fitted up, and the young ladies were immediately put in possession of a very comfortable apartment which had formerly been Charlotte's. As dinner was not to be ready in less than 2 hours from their arrival, Elinor determined to employ the interval in writing to her mother. In a few moments Marianne did the same. "I am writing home, Marianne," said Elinor. "Had not you better defer your letter for a day or two?" "I am not going to write to my mother," replied Marianne hastily. Elinor said no more. It immediately struck her that she must then be writing to Willoughby, and the conclusion which as instantly followed was that however mysteriously they might wish to conduct the affair, they must be engaged. Marianne could scarcely eat any dinner, and when they afterwards returned to the drawing-room, seemed anxiously listening to the sound of every carriage. She had been disappointed more than once by a rap at the neighbouring door, when a loud one was suddenly heard, which could not be mistaken for one at any other house. "Oh, Elinor, it is Willoughby, indeed it is!" and seemed almost ready to throw herself into his arms, when Colonel Brandon appeared. It was too great a shock to be borne with calmness, and she immediately left the room. "Is your sister ill?" said he. Elinor answered in some distress that she was, and then talked of headaches, low spirits, and over-fatigues. Mrs. Jennings soon came in.
"Oh, Colonel," said she, with her usual noisy cheerfulness, "I am monstrous glad to see you. But pray, how came you to conjure out that I should be in town today?"
"I had the pleasure of hearing it at Mr. Palmer's, where I have been dining." Elinor now began to make the tea, and Marianne was obliged to appear again. After her entrance, Colonel Brandon became more thoughtful and silent than he had ever been before, and Mrs. Jennings could not prevail on him to stay long. No other visitor appeared that evening, and the ladies were unanimous in agreeing to go to bed early.
"If this weather holds much longer," said Mrs. Jennings when they met at breakfast the following morning, "Sir John will not like leaving Barton next week. 'Tis a sad thing for sportsmen to lose a day's pleasure."
"That is true," cried Marianne in a cheerful voice. "I had not thought of that. This weather will keep many sportsmen in the country." "And now," silently conjectured Elinor, "she will write to Combe by this day's post." Colonel Brandon, who had a general invitation to the house, was with them almost every day. He came to look at Marianne and talk to Elinor, who often derived more satisfaction from conversing with him than from any other daily occurrence, but who saw at the same time with much concern his continued regard for her sister. About a week after their arrival, it became certain that Willoughby was also arrived. His card was on the table when they came in from the morning's drive.
"Good God!" cried Marianne. "He has been here while we were out!"
From this moment her mind was never quiet. She insisted on being left behind the next morning when the others went out. Willoughby paid no second visit there. A note was just then brought in and laid on the table.
"For me!"
cried Marianne, stepping hastily forward.
"No, ma'am, for my mistress."
But Marianne, not convinced, took it up instantly. "It is indeed for Mrs. Jennings. How provoking!" "You are expecting a letter, then?" said Elinor, unable to be longer silent.
"Yes, a little. Not much."
Mrs. Jennings soon appeared, and the note being given to her, she read it aloud. It was from Lady Middleton, announcing their arrival in Conduit Street the night before, and requesting the company of her mother and cousins the following evening. Never had Marianne been so unwilling to dance in her life as she was that evening. She complained of it as they returned to Berkeley Street.
Aye, said Mrs. Jennings. "We know the reason for all that very well. If a certain person, who shall be nameless, had been there, you would not have been a bit tired, and to say the truth, it was not very pretty of him not to give you the meeting when he was invited."
"Invited?" cried Marianne.
"So my daughter told me, for it seems Sir John met him somewhere in the street this morning."
Marianne said no more, but looked exceedingly hurt. Elinor resolved to write the next morning to her mother, and she was still more eagerly bent on this measure by perceiving that Marianne was again writing to Willoughby, for she could not suppose it to be any other person. Her letter was scarcely finished when a rap foretold a visitor, and Colonel Brandon was announced. Marianne, who had seen him from the window, left the room before he entered it. He looked more than usually grave, and sat for some time without saying a word. After a pause of several minutes, their silence was broken by his asking her, in a voice of some agitation, when he was to congratulate her on the acquisition of a brother. Elinor was not prepared for such a question, and was obliged to adopt the simple expedient of asking what he meant. He tried to smile as he replied, "Your sister's engagement to Mr. Willoughby is very generally known." "It cannot be generally known," returned Elinor, "for her own family do not know of it." But she acknowledged that, though she had never been informed by themselves of the terms on which they stood with each other, of their mutual affection she had no doubt. On her ceasing to speak, he rose directly from his seat, and after saying in a voice of emotion, "To your sister I wish all imaginable happiness. To Willoughby, that he may endeavour to deserve her," he took leave and went away.